The first sound came before the light. It was the long, patient groan of timber tightening in the cold, a noise so familiar to Mara Ellison that it woke her before dawn without fear. She lay still beneath her wool blankets, eyes open, listening. The mountain did not hurry. It never had. Wind moved through the firs above her cabin in low breaths, carrying snow with it, laying another quiet layer against the walls she had raised with her own hands. She sat up slowly and swung her feet to the floor. Cold pressed up from the packed earth, firm and unforgiving. She expected it. She accepted it. Still, she paused there for a moment, jaw set, measuring the bite. Outside, the winter had settled early this year, the kind that came down from the high ridges and did not leave, the kind that tested whether a person truly belonged. Mara stood and pulled on her boots. Her cabin was small, built into the slope just below the tree line where the mountain's shoulder broke into stone. One room, one fire, no wasted space. She had chosen the site because the ground leaned into the hill instead of away from it, because the wind passed over rather than through, because snow gathered gently instead of drifting hard. Still, cold was cold. She stirred the fire back to life and hung the kettle. As it warmed, she stepped outside, breath fogging the pale air. Dawn was only a suggestion behind the peaks, a lighter gray pressed against darker stone. Her mule, Ash, lifted his head from the lean-to and flicked an ear. He was steady, patient, and unharmed by the cold so long as she kept his shelter tight and his feed dry. She checked his water, broke the thin ice, and laid a hand against his neck. "Easy," she murmured. Ash leaned into her palm. The mountain woman returned inside and ate sparingly. She had learned long ago not to waste strength on fullness. Work waited. It always did. By mid-morning, the sun had reached the upper slopes, but not her cabin. Snow glittered uselessly above, while her own clearing remained locked in shade. Mara hauled another armload of wood inside and stacked it by the hearth. The pile was smaller than she liked. She noticed it then. She had been noticing it for weeks, though she had refused to name it. The woodpile was shrinking faster than it should have. She burned carefully, banked coals at night, sealed every draft she could find. Still, the cold crept up from below, leaching warmth out of the room faster than the fire could replace it. By evening, her hands ached. She sat on her stool and stared at the floor, at the place where her boots left faint prints in the dusting of ash. The earth beneath was frozen hard. It had been since the first heavy snow. Heat climbed upward, wasted itself near the rafters, escaped into the night, down where her body rested, where sleep happened, where endurance mattered most. The cold remained. It was wrong. Mara did not think in grand terms. She did not have the luxury, but she understood materials. She understood weight, flow, resistance. She had spent years watching how stone held warmth long after the sun moved on, how buried roots survived frosts that killed exposed growth. That night, as the fire died low, she lay awake and listened, not to the wind, to the cabin. Heat moved. It always did. The question was where it went, and why. To my fend, and cool fiver interned, and cool fiver int. The next day, she rode down to the lower settlement. It was a half-day journey through switchbacks and open timber. The trail was narrow but familiar. She had walked it in worse weather. The settlement itself was small, just a scatter of cabins and one shared storehouse. People there had opinions about Mara Ellison, most of them spoken behind hands. They called her stubborn. They called her impractical. Some called her foolish for living so high on the slope alone. None of them offered to trade places. She dismounted and tied Ash. Inside the storehouse, the air was warmer, but smelled of damp wool and smoke. A few men looked up when she entered, then returned to their talk. "You'll freeze up there one winter," one of them said casually, not looking at her. She did not answer. She traded dried roots for iron nails, lime, and a length of salvaged pipe. The man behind the counter raised an eyebrow at the pipe. "Drainage?" he asked, Something like that, Mara said. He shrugged. People had stopped asking her questions years ago. On the ride back, the idea took shape. Not all at once, piece by piece, like fitting stone without mortar. Heat could be made to travel. It did not have to rise straight and useless. It could be slowed, spread, forced to give itself up before escaping. By the time she reached her cabin, the sun was already sinking. She did not light the fire that night. Instead, she cleared the floor. To my fanned and cold fiver interned, as a one with the grated. Breaking earth inside a cabin is not graceful work. Mara worked with deliberate violence, driving her tool down into the packed floor, cracking years of compression and habit. Dirt flew, dust filled the air. Her hands blistered despite the gloves. She began near the hearth, where the fire already held power. She dug a trench forward, straight and narrow, angling ever so slightly upward toward the far wall. The earth resisted, but not enough to stop her. She had cut into stone before. This was nothing. By the second day, neighbors began to appear. They stood in her doorway, boots planted in snow, watching as she tore apart the floor she had once smoothed with care. "You're ruining it," one said. "You'll never finish before winter deepens," said another. She kept digging. By the end of the week, the pattern was clear. A main channel, branches spreading outward like roots. She laid the pipe carefully, sealed joints with lime and clay, reinforced weak points with iron. She worked slowly, testing slope with her hands when her level froze stiff. At night, she slept wrapped in blankets beside a weak fire, her breath fogging the air. The cabin was colder now, exposed and torn open, but she did not stop. She was not destroying her home, she was correcting it. If you don't nine, when the pipes were laid and buried again, the floor looked almost the same as before. Almost. Only she knew what lay beneath. The first test came on a gray morning thick with snow. She lit the fire and waited until it burned clean and steady. Then, she adjusted the damper she had fashioned from scrap iron, guiding the smoke where she wanted it to go. The change was subtle at first. An hour passed. Then she knelt and pressed her palm to the floor. Warmth met her skin, not the sharp heat of flame, but something deeper, steadier, the kind that did not rush away. Mara sat back on her heels and let out a breath she had been holding for weeks. Outside, the mountain remained cold and unmoved. Inside, something had shifted. She had not conquered the winter, but she had learned how to stand within it. The mountain answered experiments without mercy. By the third week after Mara Ellison buried her pipes and smoothed the floor back into something that looked ordinary, the weather turned. Not suddenly, not dramatically. It simply tightened, day by day, the way a fist closes when it means to stay shut. Snow fell without wind. Then wind came without snow. Nights deepened until even the stars felt brittle. Mara woke before dawn each morning and tested the floor with bare feet. At first, the warmth surprised her every time. It rose gently, not enough to steam breath or drive her from blankets, but enough that the cold no longer climbed straight into her bones, enough that she could stand still without boots and think. That mattered. She learned the rhythm of it quickly. Fire too hot, and the draw pulled smoke faster than the pipes could drink it. Fire too low, and the earth cooled before dawn. She learned how long the floor held warmth after the last log burned down to coals. She learned how the heat spread unevenly at first, stronger above the main run, softer near the walls, then slowly evened out as the soil itself began to remember warmth. Memory, she thought, was not just for people. By early winter, she was burning less wood than any year before. The pile still shrank, but at a pace that made sense. Her hands cracked less, her sleep came easier. The mountain noticed. On the first morning, the temperature dropped hard enough to turn breath into needles. Mara woke to a knock. It was not loud. No one knocked loudly on her door unless they were desperate. She pulled on her coat and opened it to find Eli Brand standing stiffly in the snow. He was younger than her, but already bent by years of hauling and cutting. His beard was rimed white. "You warm?" he asked, without greeting. Mara stepped aside. Eli crossed the threshold and stopped. He did not move for a long moment. Then he bent, pressed his gloved hand to the floor, and pulled it back as if it had surprised him. "This ain't right," he said quietly. She poured him water, set it near the hearth, and waited. Word travels differently in winter. Faster, sometimes, because there is little else to do but listen and remember. By the end of the week, 3 more people had come. Then 2 women from the lower slope, boots wrapped in cloth because leather had stiffened uselessly. They stood in her cabin, stamping snow from their feet, eyes scanning the floor, the walls, the second chimney that ran opposite the hearth. One of them asked the question everyone eventually asked. "Why hasn't anyone done this before?" Mara shrugged. "They might have," she said. "It just didn't spread." That answer satisfied no one, but they accepted it. The real test came when the mountain took away choice. The cold dropped further, past what even the old-timers remembered clearly. Night after night, the dark held its grip. Cabins lower on the slope burned wood until their chimneys glowed faintly red, and still frost crept across floors and into bedding. One afternoon, near dusk, Mara saw movement on the trail. A woman, bent forward, carrying more weight than her body should have. A child wrapped against her chest, unmoving but breathing. Behind her, a dog trotted stiffly, tail low but steady. Mara did not hesitate. They were inside within moments, snow melting into dark patches on the floor. The woman sank down, shaking. The child whimpered weakly, then went quiet again. "Stay," Mara said, firm and calm. She laid blankets on the warm earth, guided the child down gently, careful not to shock small limbs with sudden heat. She fed the fire, adjusted the damper, then knelt and pressed her palm against the child's back through layers of cloth. Warmth moved upward. The dog curled close but remained alert, ears flicking, watching every movement. It was unharmed, exhausted but steady. By morning, the child slept more deeply than it had in days. The woman cried into her hands, soundless. After that, no one laughed anymore. "We have to reform, to make of this." Helping others came at a cost. Mara's days filled with explanation, demonstration, repetition. She walked people through the floor pattern using a stick, scratching lines in the dirt outside. She explained slope and draw in simple terms. She warned them of smoke, of impatience, of shortcuts that would fail. Some listened, some nodded, and then built badly anyway. She went when she could, carrying tools, showing how to seal joints, how to angle pipes just enough. She refused payment beyond shared meals and help hauling wood. The mountain already took enough from people. She would not add to it. Not every cabin could be saved that winter. She knew that. No system built in frozen ground could be finished quickly. But some families moved temporarily, sleeping in turns in warmer spaces, waiting out the worst nights. The community changed without announcing itself. People stopped arguing about whether cold was inevitable and started asking where heat belonged. Mara noticed the shift not in words, but in work. Men who had once told her she lived foolishly now carried soil carefully, packing it firm, asking her to check slope with her hand. Women measured spaces and planned branch runs while children watched, learning without knowing they were learning. The mountain watched, too. Late one night, when the wind came screaming down the ridge hard enough to shake the rafters, Mara woke and stood barefoot on her floor. The warmth was still there, deep and patient. She fed the fire once, lightly, and returned to bed. She slept until dawn, and I like Test. By the time the sun began to climb higher again, something permanent had been set. Not every cabin had warm floors. Not every person trusted what they could not see. But enough did. Enough survived that winter with fewer fevers, fewer hollow mornings, fewer long nights of fear. Mara Ellison did not think of legacy. She thought of work, but sometimes, standing in her doorway as smoke drifted thin and cool from the far chimney, she allowed herself a quiet understanding. The mountain had not changed. She had learned how to live with it. Spring did not arrive all at once. It came the way it always did in the high country, reluctant, suspicious, offering one warm afternoon and then withdrawing it again as if embarrassed. Snow softened during the day and locked hard at night. Water ran beneath ice before it showed itself openly. The mountain loosened its grip, but did not let go. Mara Ellison noticed the change first in the floor. The warmth lingered longer now, not because the fire burned harder, but because the earth beneath had learned a season. The ground remembered heat the way stone remembered sun. Even on mornings when frost clung to the inside of the window frame, the floor no longer felt hostile. It felt alive. She adjusted her work accordingly. Where winter had demanded vigilance, spring demanded teaching. People came from farther away now. Some rode half a day. Some brought rough sketches, folded into pockets, smudged with charcoal and hope. They stood where others had stood months earlier, staring at her second chimney, pressing palms to packed earth, trying to understand what their eyes confirmed but their instincts resisted. Heat from below still felt wrong to them. Mara did not argue. She had learned that persuasion failed where demonstration succeeded, so she walked them through the steps, starting with the problem instead of the solution. She asked where their children slept, where frost gathered first, where feet ached most at night. She waited for answers. Only then did she talk about paths. By late spring, the lower settlement had begun to change. Floors were being broken open with purpose now, not desperation. Trenches appeared inside cabins that had stood untouched for years. Clay pipes ran out faster than the storehouse could replace them. People adapted using stone, hollowed wood sealed with pitch, anything that could carry air and give up its heat slowly. Some systems worked better than others. Mara visited the ones that didn't. She crawled along floors, opened access hatches, traced failures with her hands. Too steep, too shallow, too much haste. She corrected what she could and left notes scratched into wood for what she could not fix yet. She never stayed long. Her own work waited. That is for side and as for SETI, and responsibility is a thing that grows quietly. Mara had never asked to become the center of anything. She had not stood on a crate or raised her voice. Still, people began to look toward her when decisions needed making. When the storehouse debated whether to spend scarce trade credit on more pipe instead of grain, they asked her. When two families argued over whether to share a system between adjoining cabins, they asked her. When a man insisted his design was better because it was his, they asked her to settle it. She did not enjoy it. She understood it. One evening, as the snow line crept higher up the slope, Mara sat alone and watched the light fade from the peaks. Ash grazed nearby, steady as ever. The quiet felt heavier than it used to. She had fixed a problem. Now she was expected to maintain the answer. The mountain did not care who solved what. It would test them all again next winter. That knowledge settled into her bones deeper than the cold ever had. To descend, people are formant. The true measure came when someone tried to claim the idea. A trader from far below the valleys arrived one afternoon with polished boots and too many words. He praised the system loudly, spoke of efficiency and future demand, talked about selling plans, charging for instruction, marking pipes for resale. Mara listened without interrupting. When he finished, she shook her head. "This only works if people understand it," she said. "Not if they buy it and think it's done." He frowned. "People pay for solutions." "They pay," she agreed. And then they stopped thinking. She refused him outright. The trader left irritated, warning that others would not be so generous. Mara watched him go without response. She had no interest in guarding something that required care more than ownership. The mountain would correct misuse faster than she ever could. Redia. We frowned. By midsummer, the slope looked different. Smoke rose thinner from chimneys even on cool mornings. Wood piles lasted longer. People worked with less urgency. Fewer red eyes from sleepless nights. Children played on floors without flinching. Dogs sprawled where warmth lingered. content and unharmed. Mara noticed something else too. People began improving beyond her design. One family layered sand more carefully and gained steadier heat. Another added removable covers that made cleaning easier. Someone else adjusted branch spacing to better suit a longer cabin. They brought her their changes. Nervous, proud, seeking approval. She gave it freely, because the idea was no longer hers, alone. Redia. We frowned. Late one evening, as thunder rolled over distant peaks, Mara stood inside her cabin and listened to rain strike the roof. The floor beneath her feet held warmth from a fire she had fed hours earlier. She did not need to add more wood. She realized then that the work she had done was finished, not because nothing remained to fix, but because the knowledge no longer depended on her presence. The mountain woman had built something that could outlive her attention. That thought did not frighten her. It relieved her. Winter returned the way it always did, quietly at first. Frost traced the ground in thin white lines, long before snow followed. Mornings grew sharper. Breath lingered longer in the air. The mountain pulled its weight back down over the slopes, testing what had been left behind. This winter was not gentler. It was simply understood. Mara Ellison felt it the first night the temperature dropped hard enough to silence insects completely. She woke before dawn, bare feet finding the floor without thought. The warmth was there, deep and steady, rising slowly as it always did. She added one log to the fire and listened to the draft settle into its familiar path. The system held. Across the slope, others woke the same way. Not all at once, not in the same cabins, but enough that a pattern formed. Fires burned smaller, smoke drifted cooler, floors no longer shocked, bodies awake in the dark. There were still storms. There were still nights when wind pressed hard enough to make walls groan, but fewer people panicked. Fewer rushed outside in the dark to split wood with numb hands. Fewer children cried from cold that crept up through bedding. No animals were lost. None were harmed. They slept curled where warmth pooled, breathing slow and steady. The mountain did not grow kinder. The people grew better prepared. Cancer won. The proof came late in the season. A storm rolled down from the high ridges with no warning. Snow fell thick and heavy, sealing trails and burying markers. For 3 days, no one moved between cabins. Smoke was the only sign of life. On the 4th morning, Mara stepped outside and counted chimneys. All of them breathed. When paths were cleared again, people emerged thinner, tired, but intact. Stories passed quietly of warm floors holding through the worst night, of fires banked and trusted, of sleep that came when it should have. No one called it miraculous. They called it practical. Cancer won. By spring, the knowledge had traveled farther than Mara ever had. It moved the way useful things do through hands, through winters survived, through floors that did not betray the people who trusted them. Mara returned to her routines. She cut wood. She mended tools. She watched the mountain shift its light from snow to stone. The attention faded naturally, as attention always does when urgency passes. She was content with that. Some evenings, she stood in her doorway and watched smoke lift thin and slow from the second chimney, the one no one questioned anymore. The mountain woman had not conquered the cold. She had simply listened long enough to understand it, and that was enough. Epilogue. Years passed without announcement. They did not arrive as milestones or markers, but as accumulated mornings. Frost, then dew, snow, then melt. The mountain did not count time the way people did, and Mara Ellison learned to follow its measure instead. She marked seasons by what the ground allowed her to do, by when tools could be lifted without cracking skin, by how long warmth lingered in the floor after a fire had gone quiet. Her cabin aged gently. Wood darkened. Stone settled. The second chimney, once a curiosity that drew eyes and questions, became an ordinary feature of the slope. Smoke rose from it thin and pale, a sign not of excess fire but of patience. Those who passed no longer stopped to stare. They nodded, as people do when something has proven itself enough times to stop being remarkable. Mara remained. She did not leave the mountain after that first winter of proof. She did not move lower or build larger. She did not turn her work into trade or instruction beyond what was asked of her. The cabin suited her, and the land around it provided what she needed. She rose early, slept when dark demanded it, and kept her body honest with labor that mattered. The floor remained warm. That detail never lost its meaning, even when it lost its novelty. On the coldest mornings, when ice traced the inside of the window and the air felt sharp enough to cut, she would pause barefoot on the packed earth and feel the steady rise of heat from below. Not a rush, not a blaze, just enough, always enough. She learned that enough was a skill. The community around her changed in small, durable ways. Cabins that once burned wood in desperation now burned it with intention. People spoke differently about winter, not with bravado, not with dread, but with planning. Children grew up assuming that floors could be warm, that cold did not have to start at the feet and climb upward while sleep failed. Animals adapted too, choosing resting places where warmth pooled naturally. Dogs sprawled across floors instead of huddling near flames. Livestock fared better through long nights when barns borrowed the same principles. Heat slowed, spread, and allowed to do its work before escaping. No one named it after Mara. Some called it underfloor heat, some called it buried draft, some called it mountain sense. She did not correct them. Names mattered less than habits, and habits were what endured. When people came with questions years later, they came not with desperation but with curiosity. They asked about spacing and slope. They asked why sand mattered. They asked what went wrong when smoke backed up or warmth came unevenly. Mara answered patiently. She showed them how to feel with their hands instead of trusting their eyes. She taught them to listen to the sound of draw, to recognize the difference between a system breathing freely and one being forced. She reminded them that heat wanted to move, and that the task was not to fight it but to guide it. Some took the lessons and improved them. Others copied without understanding and learned later, slowly, why care mattered. The mountain corrected mistakes gently when it could, harshly when it had to. Through it all, Mara remained steady. She aged the way stone does, edges softened, not weakened. Her hands bore the history of work, fingers bent slightly from years of gripping tools and carrying weight. Her hair silvered without ceremony, her stride shortened but did not falter. She did not live alone, exactly. Ash grew old with her, then was replaced by another mule, just as patient, just as solid. Dogs came and went, always unharmed, always companions rather than possessions. They learned the warm spots on the floor instinctively and slept where the earth offered comfort. Mara never married. She never explained that choice, and no one pressed her. She had built a life that did not require filling. There was room enough for her thoughts, for the quiet work of keeping things right. Sometimes, on long winter nights, she remembered the first year, the tearing up of her floor, the doubt in other people's eyes, the risk she had taken when no one asked her to. She remembered the fear too, though she rarely spoke of it, the fear that the system would fail, that she would wake one morning to cold earth and realize she had gambled wrong. That fear had taught her something valuable. Not courage, exactly. Care. Care in measurement. Care in patience. Care in understanding what mattered before acting. Those lessons stayed with her long after the fear faded. As decades passed, newer heating methods arrived in the valleys below. Iron stoves, better sealed, manufactured parts that promised ease. Some cabins replaced their old systems. Some kept both, trusting redundancy more than novelty. On the slope, where hauling heavy iron was still an effort, many kept what they had. The floor systems did not compete. They simply continued. When one cracked or clogged, it was repaired. When a cabin was abandoned, the earth eventually reclaimed the pipes beneath it, holding the last warmth they ever carried. Mara watched all of it without attachment. She had never built for permanence. She had built for survival. The rest followed on its own. In her later years, she spent more time sitting in her doorway, watching the light move across the mountain face. She could tell the weather by the way sound traveled, by how smoke lifted or flattened. She could feel changes in the ground before they reached the air. On one particular evening, late in a winter that had been neither mild nor cruel, she sat barefoot on her floor and rested her hands on her knees. The fire behind her was low, just coals breathing faintly. The warmth beneath her rose as it always had, steady and reliable. She thought, briefly, of all the winters that Flor had outlasted. She thought of the people who had slept better because heat had met them where they were, instead of abandoning them overhead. She thought of children who had grown without knowing the particular ache of frozen ground. She thought of the quiet competence that had spread from one cabin into many, not because it was demanded, but because it worked. The mountain did not acknowledge her thoughts. It did not need to. When Mara Ellison eventually stopped waking before dawn, there was no drama in it. The season was turning. The ground was firm but not hostile. The cabin was as she had left it the night before, orderly, prepared, sufficient. Those who came later found no instructions carved into walls, no declarations of intent. They found a floor that still held warmth long after a fire had faded. They found access hatches placed where sense dictated. They found a system that asked only to be understood. They kept it, and the mountain, unchanged and unyielding, allowed it. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale where destiny and courage collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider to hype our video to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.